Hello everyone, I realised I stopped that music just before the beat dropped. I'm terrible. Welcome to the Raise.Dev Hacktoberfest Help Desk. My name is Joe and I am your host for the day. This is our first of 3 shows today. If you're new to the Hacktoberfest Help Desk, it is your resource to help you land your pull requests this Hacktoberfest, and that means we bring you tips and tricks on how to contribute to open source and get your start in open source, as well as showing you new projects and new ways to contribute to those projects. That's exactly what's going to happen in this show right here. We have a special guest coming on very shortly, and we're doing what we call a More Than Code episode, where we look at ways to contribute to projects that aren't necessarily just code, and that is something our guest is working on in a really cool project. Hey Shreyas, welcome to the show. But before I bring on our guest and before we get going talking about them and that, a couple of house things to go through before we get going. So as I said, this is our first of 3 shows today. Our next show is with Nathaniel Okomoth and Twilio, and then our final show of the day is with Sam Langing. You can catch... My pronunciation there was terrible. Got that, like, last day of Hacktoberfest energy. Anyway, you can catch our full schedule at twitch.tv/RaiseDev schedule, and I say full schedule very lightly because there are only 2 days left of Hacktoberfest, which means only 2 days left of this show. That means we have, including this one, we have 6 shows left to go, and you can see all of those in our schedule at twitch.tv/RaiseDev schedule, and you can follow us here on Twitter. Not on Twitter. You can follow us here on Twitch, the other website that begins with T and W. You can follow us here on Twitch to get notifications when we go live. Press the love heart and press the bell. You can also follow us on Twitter at RaiseDevs, where we tweet an hour before every show, so you can make sure you definitely don't miss anything. Other than that, the only other thing from me is 2 things from me, in fact. First up, chat. As I said, we are here to help you, which means that chat is all yours. Please post in chat, please ask questions in chat. They can be relevant to what we're talking about or not, and we will answer your questions before the end of the show. And if you want to share a link or a URL to any resources or anything you're working on, you're very welcome, but we do have a moderation bot. So what you need to do is at RaiseDevs, mention me in chat, just say like, hey RaiseDevs, can I post a link? I'll add you to the permit list, and then that'll make sure you do not get your link removed by our bot. And then the final thing, if you haven't heard of Raise.Dev yet, we are a service to help you level up in your developer career, and how that works is we match you with an expert coach, someone who's been in the industry, someone who's done it before, and they will work with you, they'll pair program with you, they'll help you plan out your next steps, and help you get that first developer job, that promotion, that raise, whatever leap in your developer career you're trying to make. Our expert coaches will help you do just that, and we are completely free whilst we're in early access. So that's something from me. Let me bring on our guest for the show. Please welcome Gianluca to the stage. How are you doing, Gianluca?
Hey, I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for having me. So let's see what we can do today.
Pleasure. Yeah. So do you want to start by introducing yourself to the viewers?
Sure. I'm Gianluca. I'm from Italy, so I'm in the north side, close to the Alps, and cool. I work as a software engineer at Equinix Metal, that is a cloud provider that serves bare metal like servers. And and that's it. And I work a lot in Go, but previously I worked like with PHP and JavaScript and all this stuff. So
awesome.
Yeah,
cool. I'm going to try and say Equinix Metal as little as possible today, because when we had your colleague on in the previous show, Rain, they were very entertained by the many ways I pronounced it wrong. So I'll try my best today. Thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome. For the viewers, let me give you a little idea of what we're going to do and how it's going to work. We're going to start by talking a little bit about your career, Gianluca, and then we're going to move on towards the back end of the show to talking about a project that you work on, which is a pretty well-known project, I would say. That being Kuberenetes. Or is that how do you pronounce it?
Oh, all the time in a different way.
So
it's a surprise. Like Kuberenetes, maybe?
Right.
I don't know.
That works. I've heard Kubernetes quite a lot. So we're going to be talking about that, and in particular, we're going to be talking about a special interest group that you work on, which I believe is the release group. Is that correct?
Yes, you're right.
Awesome. Cool. So we're going to talk all about that, releasing software. We've done that quite a lot on this show, actually. We had Hugh Rawlinson who came and spoke about semantic release, and we did that with OctoKit with Gregor as well. So another one of those episodes. And we're going to be looking at, in particular, that through the lens of like, hey, this is the way you can contribute to a huge open source project that isn't just adding code. So very interesting. So to start off with, I said you're a software engineer at Equinix Metal. In particular, you're a senior staff software engineer, which is a title that's high up in there, yeah, for sure. So where did it all start for you? Like, tell us a little bit about how your developer career got started.
Well, I mean, I started the university as many, and I didn't make it through all of it. So I think I survived for a couple of months, and I say, okay, I'm up for working. So I managed to get a job that was like writing a CMS in PHP for a lab in the
Right.
university. And it was surprising and was like scary because I never wrote like code by myself before for a real project. So I was like, it was a
Right.
solo project.
Yeah.
That's it. And my day started with me like asking for help on ERC and trying to figure out how to goes over this task. So for me, it was like I I opened my laptop and I
Yeah.
cloned like a bunch of PHP code. I looked at Stack
Yeah.
Overflow and I started. So I wrote that CMS
Yeah.
maybe 4 times.
Okay.
One, because I was quickly get to a point where it was like
Yeah.
unmaintainable and unusable.
Right.
So luckily for me, I got
Yeah.
like very much support from the ERC community, and
Right.
I started to do my PHP and my SQL like
That's
CMS,
awesome.
and that was my very first job. So that's how I started.
Right.
Um,
Fascinating.
it was like a long journey,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I moved like I I tend to change like companies frequently. It's not
Right.
great, but it helps,
Yeah.
at least for me. So I moved from Italy. I moved from Italy to
Yeah.
Dublin at some point
Okay.
to improve my English and to
Right.
see new opportunities.
Okay.
And after a year and a half, I got back to Italy and I started to work remote for Influx
Cool.
Data. This is the company that
Interesting.
does InfluxDB.
Yeah.
It is a database for time series.
Mhm.
I mean, for me, like open source was like something that I deal with since day one because
Right.
I mean, ERC were the place before Slack where open source like was leaving whatever.
Right.
So I
Right.
worked
Right.
there,
Right. Yeah.
and I started asking questions. At some point, I was able to answer them,
Yeah.
and at some point, I was able to make some contribution.
Yeah.
And for me, like being part of a community is, I think, what made me like a developer. If somebody asks me like what made you the developer you are today, it's
Right.
like being part of the community and
Interesting.
ha- yeah,
Okay.
ask for help, get
Yeah.
help, and like give help.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Okay. Cool. So I have some questions about what you said so far. So first of all, I want to go back a little bit to what you said about moving companies, and you said that was helpful. I want to talk a little bit about what ways that was helpful because we've spoken about it. So I guess to give some context, we've spoken to some past guests about part of the unfortunate reality of the tech industry is that like it's very good at rewarding people for getting new jobs and very bad at rewarding people when they stay at a job. Like
Yeah.
just as an industry, we're terrible at like if you've been at a company for years, it's far easier to get a promotion by changing company than it is by staying. Was that part of like what you found helpful about moving jobs, or was there something else that you were looking for?
I think I started to look at the career ladder for
Right.
myself
Yeah.
very recently. Like I started to work as a developer like maybe I
Right.
think 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So and I think I started to trying to figure out what it means to be
Right.
like a staff engineer, what it means to
Right.
be a principal engineer, whatever.
Mhm.
Like maybe last year because
Yeah.
before I mean for me it was like all about like having good challenges
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like fix all the
Cool.
bugs that I was
Cool.
able to find.
Nice.
So at least for myself, I changed jobs mainly because I had a new goal in my
Right.
in my life.
Cool.
So for me, it was way easier to just say, okay, I'm gonna change. Like
Right.
when I moved to like for example, a couple of reasons, right?
Yeah.
When I was looking for a job in outside from Italy, like in
Yeah.
Dublin, I
Right.
obviously I had to
It's
change.
far easier to change company than it is to get them to hire you in a new place. Yeah.
That's it. So
Yeah.
so I had to change job in there. And
Right.
when I felt that it was time for me to come back to Italy, I
Yeah.
had to change job again because
Right. Right.
remote
Right.
work wasn't that like
Yeah.
uh, diffuse as it is today.
Yeah.
So
For
that
sure.
was another reason.
Cool.
Another reason I had was because I was willing to move out from the PHP JavaScript land to something different. So I pick
Right.
up by myself Golang because I was looking for a compile language to learn.
Mhm.
I like to to try different languages to
Yeah.
learn new way of coding. So and when I was happy enough with my hobbyist skills with Golang, I say okay, it's time to move on and take another bet and or bring my skills to another level. So I had to
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
For me,
Interesting.
that's the driving, like something new
Yeah.
to do or a new
Yeah.
idea or that's it. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like, yeah, there being varied life circumstances and different goals related to your life that you're changing
Yeah.
companies for is makes total sense. Tawari, just want to let you know, I've seen your question, and that is a very good question. I'll think about it for a bit and we'll get back to you. Oh, so the question, Gianluca, I don't know if we're ready to answer it now. This might be one we come to in a bit. The question is, what do we need to prepare if we want to go into product-based companies if we are not in if like we're not studying in college? And that's a very good question. I don't know if you have any insights right now, or if we should stew on that for a bit and come
Yeah,
back to it.
let's
Yeah,
see if something shows up. I will
yeah,
keep it in my mind. So
yeah. We'll come back to that. Don't worry. Yeah, cool. So I wanted to ask you first about moving companies. We've done that. So the next one I want to talk about is like you said, you were talking about how open source and like being in those communities is actually what made you a developer in some of the ways that happened through like IRC and then realizing you could answer questions. So I guess just a really simple like, what was the first open source project that you remember like having that community feeling from?
yeah, I mean, for like the first reason, I can tell you the first reason about why I opened ERC. It's like I was developing in PHP, looking at Stack
Right.
Overflow's like question, and at some
Yeah.
point I was doing like spaghetti code and
Yeah.
no objects or whatever, and I
Yeah.
said, okay, this is not gonna stay for long because I can't
Yeah.
really read my code anymore. So
Right.
I looked for like PHP frameworks and
Yeah.
showed up that like in Turin there is a person that I mean helped me a lot, like
Cool.
in person with the it's
Yeah.
called is Enrico Zimwell, that is a developer
Okay.
that is working on the PHP. It was working at the time in the
Yeah.
Zen framework. That was a
Yeah.
popular PHP framework back in the
Yeah.
day, and it comes to be in my city or very close to my city. So
Yeah.
I saw that he was organizing like meetups
Right.
about PHP. So I joined, and during the first meetup there, I also got my second job. So I was like, I was almost like at the end of my work with the with the lab, and
Right.
I was also looking for something. I mean, back in the day, I needed for a different environment because
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard to learn when you are a solo developer, like
For
working
sure.
in a
Yeah.
lab where
Yeah.
there are no other developers like you.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a great way because I had to figure out solutions by myself,
Yeah.
but I was looking. I mean, I need
Right.
something different.
You didn't have someone
So
who could help you like find those solutions. You had to be
yeah,
completely original. Yeah.
yeah, and also somebody that was gonna giving me like good challenges
Yeah.
for my learning and not
Right.
just good challenges because I had to
Right.
develop
Right.
code
Yeah. Yeah.
or a product.
Yeah.
So yeah, the first project for sure was like Zen framework and PHP
Mm-hmm.
related libraries.
Cool.
Luckily for me, I as I said, I had a person that was like in my city and very
Yeah.
good open source developer that raised
Cool.
me up. So that's
Right.
good.
That's awesome. Super cool. Um, and so we spoke a little bit about like so you like some of the ways then that open source helped you like participating in RNC and this kind of stuff. And obviously since then, uh, the way open source communities have interact has changed a little bit due to like the tools we have. When you approach a new open source, do you have any tips for people who are starting that journey today and are like starting to approach like an open source project and thinking like, oh, how do I best get help from this project? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It really depends if
Yeah.
how do you approach like the project itself. So if you are
Right.
using the project because you have to use it somehow,
Right.
you have a way. I mean,
Right.
you go in. Today is their Slack, so you
Right.
open
Right.
their Slack, you join them, and you
Yeah.
start to see where you can go and ask questions. But if
Yeah.
you are onboarding a project because you want to do it or you like
Mhm.
it, so maybe you don't have the right questions or the easy question because maybe they are more related to if you start to use a project, other people that are users can
Right.
help you, but
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
want to contribute, you need to find contributors, and
Sure.
usually there are fewest contributors than users in
Mhm.
like open
Mhm.
source
Mhm.
projects. So
Yeah.
it's harder to find contributors than other users. So if you want to
Right.
contribute, you have to find them. And I think that like I keep saying that like in any stream or any
Yeah.
like whatever happens, but because it really like helped me a lot
Right.
recently. Like
Yeah.
Nat Friedman, the CEO of GitHub,
Right.
I think it was during a GitHub Satellite,
Mhm.
it's their
Mhm.
conference.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said something like, when you want to start to contribute to a project, you have to clone it locally.
Right.
And I mean, it
That's
sounds obvious, But
Yeah.
sometimes we just look at the project on
Yeah.
github.com
Right. Right.
or on their websites,
Yeah.
and it looks like somebody else's code. But
Right.
as soon
Right.
as you clone it like on your laptop, it becomes
I see.
like
Yeah.
your code. I mean, it's
Yeah.
your code.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I'd never thought about that before. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very
I
true.
mean,
Yeah.
his sentence was like clear, like clone the
Right.
repo.
Right.
And when I thought about it more, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
now I have their code on my laptop, so it's my code. It's like my code.
Right.
So easy. So probably,
Awesome.
probably
Yeah.
there is a make file.
Yeah.
Probably there is a .travis YAML,
Right.
YAML file that helped
Yeah.
me to figure out how to build or test the project.
Right.
There is a README that I can read, or
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah. And
it
obviously the
becomes simple.
contributing guidelines, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I usually when I onboard a new project I want to
Yeah.
contribute to, I look for obviously the README. So I give I have a like brief looking at the README.
Yeah.
In Go, I look for a main.go file
Cool.
or like a CMD package because
Mm-hmm.
usually is where all the endpoints are, the entry points are.
Right.
And I look for the make file because
Mm-hmm.
usually it tells me how it gets
How the
built.
program's like running.
And
Yeah.
if the make file is too awkward, that usually it's awkward.
Mm-hmm.
I look for like the CI pipeline. So if they
Right.
use Travis, or if they
Yeah.
use Drone or GitHub
Mm-hmm.
Action, in there I find good tips about the pipeline or the tools that they are using, and
Cool.
from there I kind of reconstruct how to
That's awesome.
contribute properly.
That's a really great little map to onboarding on a project. So I guess to make that real, we're here today to talk about Kubernetes and the sig-release process. How did you get involved with Kubernetes?
Oh, I mean, there is only one way you get involved because somebody around you like is using it or wants to use
Right,
it.
right, right.
So for me, I started as a developer, but I
Yeah,
quickly moved to like more DevOps or operation, mainly
sure.
because when I joined a company in Turin that is it organized a huge conference, the CloudConf,
Mm-hmm.
and they are tied to helping companies move into the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I joined them, I learned how powerful I can be as a developer in the
Right.
ops land
Okay.
because I can do like a lot of cool stuff just with
Mm-hmm.
with a small amount of code.
Right.
And from there, it was like and that's also one of the reasons about why I picked Go at some point, I presume,
Right.
because
Right. Right.
because all the tools that are DevOps related,
Yeah.
like Terraform or Docker and whatever, they are all in Go.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, yeah, this sounds familiar to me. I want to learn it, so I want to
Cool.
contribute and start to pick up Go. But yeah, it was
Awesome.
so I learned how to a bit what it means to do provisioning or operation
Right.
from helping companies,
Mm-hmm.
and by consequence, I started to pick like Chef. After that, it
Mm-hmm.
was
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
Ansible. After that was like SaltStack. After
Right.
that was Docker. After that was Kubernetes. That's
Yeah.
the journey you
Interesting.
you are
For a
into.
lot of technologies.
Yeah, so it's like it's almost like, yeah, that's it. And that's why I started to look at Kubernetes.
Right.
The first like real challenge I had with it was when I moved to Influx Data,
Right.
because at some point we started to move our SaaS to Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to bring it up, and
Right.
I was an SRE there, so
Right.
my role was to help
Basically
with
living in Kubernetes full time.
yeah. I mean, when I joined, Kubernetes wasn't there, so I
Mm-hmm.
was doing a different kind of
Yeah.
SRE,
Yeah.
and I had to move myself into
Cool.
Kubernetes and the
Yeah.
company and the
Yeah.
team that was developing
Cool.
database.
Do you mind if we go on a tangent here, actually? Because we've spoken about SREs a couple of times on the show, but I don't think we've ever actually defined what that role is and what it means. Do you want to briefly talk about what an SRE is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about the right answer here, but I can tell you
In your
my
experience,
answer.
yeah. I mean, every job titles are more recommendations than they are definitions, aren't they?
Yeah,
But yeah,
I mean the reason about why I thought that SRE was my role,
right.
let's say, was because I'm a developer that
Yeah.
likes to operate software. And SRE means like site reliability engineer, so there is reliability somewhere along the line. And for me, it was a good way to be the glue between like who is writing code, something that I can do and I can understand, with who is like running the code in production. And ideally, the like closing the gap is my goal. Like having those two people the same or as close as possible was my goal. So it's a lot of like how I helping developer to get the right tools to understand how their code runs when it goes away from their laptop.
Awesome.
So instrumentation, telemetry, logs, how you instrument your application, because it's not like it was before, like years ago when I had a colleague that was very good at understanding how its code was running in production, because he was doing like tail that f, and based on the how fast the log was or how slow the log were, he was kind of able to figure out if the code was doing fine. This doesn't work anymore, because we should. We have too many tail.f to do that. We can't call them. So it's not really precise, and it's like there is a little bit of buzz factor. So if my colleagues wasn't there, we were not really able. We didn't have the same skill like him. So the instrumentation part is important. So the way you teach your application how to communicate with you is crucial. And one responsibility for me as a SRE was to help to write instrument the applications.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That like idea that like, and I know it's a simplification of what you just said, but the idea that like part of what SREs do is like teach the application to communicate to the engineers is really interesting.
Yeah, for me at least, that's how I developed the role, because I'm a developer, so I understood like that side of the spectrum, but I also really like to see my code running in a real environment. So I also know what it means to look at the metrics and don't be able to like figure out what's going on, because
these are some nice graphs.
That's very good one. Yeah, I like that spike. Yeah, that's good. Let me take a picture of that. I'm gonna use it as my screensaver.
Exactly. That's how I feel looking at most software graphs. Cool, awesome. Thank you for going on that detail with us. So, so at the time you were in InfluxDB and you were an SRE, and you just kind of moved the SaaS onto Kubernetes, which is, it sounds like a big undertaking. So I imagine there was a certain amount of like being thrown in the deep end with that, where you were doing something completely different, and I was like, cool, now I need to learn this product and also deploy our SaaS on it.
It was challenging time, and I wasn't alone, luckily. So I had other colleagues that were better than me at the Kubernetes side of the spectrum. So I think I was more tight on, okay, let's figure out how all those like engineers that are developing code can run it on Kubernetes, and trying to see how it behaves there. The operational side of Kubernetes is something I learned along the way. And luckily, I wasn't alone that time, so it was good.
Cool.
As I said, I think it was 4 years ago, so I was already like, I tried to sneak myself in a bunch of communities already, so I had some experience. So I just started to follow their Slack, and I registered to a bunch of mailing lists. They use a lot of lists in Kubernetes. We use a lot of them. So.
Which is something I want to ask you about as well, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So subscribe to mailing lists and follow them.
I will come to the concrete organization in a bit. But I started in that way. So I started to run Kubernetes locally, as a lot of us are doing. And just a step back. So Kubernetes is an orchestration framework. So it's a set of binaries that you have to run all together, and in some way configure in the way that they can speak with each other. That's a simplification, but it's a bit of binaries. You have a few of them, like 7, and you have to run them together. So you have a control plan that is a server or a bunch of them that knows what to do, and they know what to do because you tell them with a kubectl or with a UI, with a CLI or with a UI, what do you want. So you can tell them, I want 5 containers, or I want like an ingress, so an Nginx that can take the traffic coming in and forwarding them to the pods and so on. So you tell them what you want, like it's a magic box, and it tries its best to make it happen and to keep it running. So it's used to distribute containers across like nodes. Because when you are in your laptop and you have a container and you run it, that's cool. But in production, you need many of them. You need to be reliable, so you need to have them distributed across multiple nodes. And when they go down, something like Kubernetes has to spin up a new one, and so on. So it's like it's a way to make like your container running in a reliable way.
Right. Awesome, interesting, cool. So yeah, that I'm glad we took time to explain that because God, how do I say this without sounding like an idiot? Kubernetes is one of these projects I feel like I hear about every day. I have used in like a really bad way. Like the first time I used Kubernetes, I was like being like, hey, everyone's talking about this, I should try it. And like deploying a cluster on some Raspberry Pis and then being like, cool, that's nice. I have no idea what to do with this now. I'm never touching it again. So it's always nice to hear an actual explanation of what it is rather than just like, I guess like the huge surrounding of hype.
Yeah, I mean there is definitely a lot of hype, and the consequence is that we have like 1,000 different ways to use Kubernetes. But I think it also solves like a problem that people have. So maybe it's not the best solution, maybe it's not the one you want, but it's a solution you can use. So
Shreyas, are you mocking me for being interested in what our guests have to say? Shreyas said, right, awesome, interesting, cool. That's apparently how I sound.
I mean, you're a great host, Joe, so I didn't get that.
Tuari said something which I guess is a good point to jump off and talk about, contrasting it to some other tools in the space people have heard of. So Tuari said, Kubernetes, it is used in Docker. Nah. So I guess if there's a question there, but I guess what he's asking is like, what is the relationship between like Kubernetes and other deployment tools that people may see? So like, if I go into like, for example, a random GitHub repo for an open source project, I will often see a Docker file or another file that specifies some deployment environment. Where does like that end and like Kubernetes begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the takeaway that I always find interesting when I think about Docker is like Docker gives us the ability to declare a smart tarball that can be run everywhere. So the Docker file is a way we have to describe what our application wants and how you run it, and you have like a way to run it in your local environment, and that's it. You build it, you push it, and you ship it, and that's fine. But as I said before, when it comes to like production, you don't have a single container or a single application. You have many of them. They have to communicate. Sometimes they don't have to communicate. So you have to block the communication, or you have to keep them balanced. So if you want 5 replicas, you need to have those 5 replicas, and they have to work and be reliable. All of those tasks are the ones solved by Kubernetes. So Kubernetes doesn't really run your container. It demands that to what is called CRI, that is a container runtime interface. The most popular one is Docker itself. So when you ask for a pod in Kubernetes, it doesn't create a container or a pod. It reaches the CRI, Docker, and says, okay, I want a container. It has to use this image. It has to expose those ports. It has to run in that subnet, and so on. Whatever you can do with the Docker run command, you can almost do that with Kubernetes, but it's not like a Kubernetes job to run your container.
That makes sense.
It runs on another layer. It's an orchestrator, so it helps you to orchestrate and schedule all those.
Talk to all those other technologies that various people use. Like that could be Docker, it could be something entirely different. That makes a lot of sense. Awesome. So we mentioned it a little bit, but I wanted to. I don't know the order to do this. So I want to talk about how you went from like, you spoke a little bit about sliding into some Kubernetes mailing lists and getting involved with the project. I think before we talk about how you did that, it might be important to talk a little bit about the shape of the Kubernetes project. Because a lot of people, their experience with an open source project is like they go to a GitHub repo and it's like one repo, maybe there's a Slack, and that's kind of it, right? Whereas like Kubernetes is like a company in itself. Like there's for example, the SIGs, which is what we're going to be talking about, one of the SIGs today. If people who don't know, SIG is a special interest group, is what it stands for. There are like 100 of these. So
Yeah.
how is this project structured?
Yeah, I mean it's a complicated project, and that's one of the reasons about why I tried and I'm contributing to Kubernetes, because
Great.
I want to see and touch and help a project of that size, because it's a different, like, environment compared with, like, as you say, project that has one repo
Right.
and that's
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
not
very
like that.
operating at a very different scale and significance, and a lot of like, hey, like your own little npm module that like maybe has a couple of hundred downloads, and then there's like the technology that powers data centers all over the world. It's very different
Yeah,
requirements, I
yeah.
guess.
You have to remember that Kubernetes is designed to be used everywhere and to run
Right.
everywhere, and it's succeeding on that, because if you go in any cloud provider or you are on Metal, you can run Kubernetes. It can be painful, it can be very simple, but you can do it, and that's the reason about why it's so complicated. And there is not just one company, but there are like thousands of companies that are contributing for different reasons. So that's why it's complicated. There are companies that want to contribute because they do training, or they are doing like courses and videos, or there are companies that want to inject their code because they are a SaaS company, or they provide like DNS services, or or they are cloud providers. So all those companies are coming together with their needs and their desires and trying to get something into Kubernetes or out from Kubernetes. So that's why it's so hard, and that's why it's backed from a foundation that helps to keep the project like going without a single company that takes all of it for itself. So that's one of the reasons about it. It is complicated because there is interest and it's a huge project. So the way it works, it's not that different. Let me go to my screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me know when that's ready to add up.
Yeah, it is ready. So there is
Cool.
my browser in there.
Awesome.
Do you see?
I do. And yeah, actually, whilst we're on this page, just a couple of things to note. So, like, again, as we were talking about, the scale of this, a GitHub organization, usually for an open source project, we usually have like, the core maintainers as members of the organization, and everyone else will kind of be outside. Whereas, like, if you look at like the people, for 1,100 people in this organization, that is bigger. Like, for context, when I worked at GitHub for the 3 years I was there, GitHub was below 1,000 employees.
So yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons why I say this is. That's why I was curious to see how it works, because
Right,
it's a different scale. It's a unique scale almost. There are a few projects that has this scale, but it's not that different. So if you go in Kubernetes, you have your Kubernetes here, and
Right.
this is where the code lives. So as I told you before, the way I start to look at the open source project, it is with the README, and we have one,
Yeah.
and with makefile, but the makefile is a symlink to a build root Kubernetes,
Sure.
build root makefile. So you start doing there, and you do root, and you start
Yeah,
to
you put the make
question
sure.
why,
Yeah.
but who knows? That's
Yeah.
not the
Well, I
question.
guess that's them. Like, this is interesting actually because like they obviously recognize that there are certain files that people look for in the root directory, and even though they're not set up that way, they want to expose those files to people like you who are looking for those things, which makes total sense.
Yeah, so you have a make call that probably will
Yeah.
take who knows how much
Yeah.
to build. But yeah, so when I start to see that the make file is so long, I question my like to onboard a new project
Yeah.
from a make file.
Right.
So the second like item on my bucket list when it's a Go project is the CMD folder, as I told you. So yeah, the CMD contains something that if I read the documentation, I can understand, or I can, figure out. So there is a kubectl
So just
that
make
is,
sure I understand it. The CMD folder contains like so I guess that stands for commands. So it contains like the binaries or the commands that would be run on the CLI to
yeah,
run the program.
yeah.
Okay.
From my experience, CMD, if there are more than one endpoint,
Yeah.
and I mean, if the Go project compiles more than one binary, there
Right.
is a CMD folder that contains
Cool.
all those binaries,
Awesome.
or all
Great.
the entry points for the binaries. This is coming from my experience with
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah. That makes
obviously,
sense.
like if you're new to Go and the open source project, obviously it gets a bit more, a bit harder. But
For sure.
you can always look for, if you know that Kubernetes has a kubectl, you can kind of look for kubectl here. It's a bit more complicated, but you can do it. And so if you read some tutorials on Kubernetes, you know that there is a kubectl, that there is a kubelet, that there is a kuadm, and so you start to connect the dot and see, oh, okay, this is I use the kubectl locally, so let's see what there is inside. And you see a single file. So what is this file doing? So there is a main, so I know that that's the entry point for the kubectl. That's good. And from there, I start to look at there is not much here to look at. Like there is a command execute, and command come from cmd new default kubectl command. So what is this cmd all about? I can see that the cmd is imported from here, and Kubernetes.io, Kubernetes package, kubectl. So what's that all about? So from here, I start to look deeper and see where I can go. So there is a package here, so I can go here, and my expectation is to see what was the path. Package kubectl command. So okay, so where is my kubectl here? So it's here. It's kubectl, so it's there. I'm trying. I think I'm understanding something. So there is a cmd, and that's
awesome.
That's the command for your cmd. As you can see, those are the command that you kind of know. So when you do kubectl edit, maybe this is the edit command. I mean, obviously, I kind of know how it works. So for me, it's different.
Right.
I presume you can get the vibe of this. Somehow.
No, I think this is super interesting, and I'm absolutely fascinated by this kind of stuff. We spoke about this is very meta, folks, but we spoke about like when we were planning the show, we were like we want to give new engineers an idea of how like experienced people approach open source and open source code, and so like this and just like, hey, you've come to a new project, how on earth do you figure out where to start, is so useful, and I love this very much. So thank you for taking us on that journey. That's super cool.
Oh yeah, I'm very happy to share. I mean, one of the first stuff I do when I work with an open source project, or when when you have a job, usually like 90% of the code comes from open source. So for me, it's very important to connect with those communities when I start to use a project more and more.
Sure.
So I mean, there are even simpler projects. Like I use Grammarly a lot to write when I write blog posts or whatever. So there is an extension for Chrome that helps you to convert like Grammarly to Markdown.
Is that Grammarly to Markdown? Oh, that's super cool.
It's super cool, but when I use it, it exported the Markdown, the links for the Markdown, not inline, so not with the square brackets, but with at the bottom of the article. So I saw
it like footnotes, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I saw it was like an open source project, so I cloned it and I made a contribution. So now I can this is not Grammarly, but now I can like export in both ways.
That's cool. Nice. Awesome.
It doesn't need to be Kubernetes, but if it's something that you use, it's better. It's easier.
For sure. So this is like, so you've shown us that like, I don't know, Kubernetes, despite being huge, still has like an obvious core and an obvious entry point. So at what point do you break out from here into the SIGs? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just to mention that you have, I told you that
sub projects.
Yeah, and you also have like if you see, this is the list of repositories, and you see a kubeadmin here. So there is something there, something in the main one, and something outside. So how do you reconcile? And this is because like everything started in the same root, but the project grew so much that has to be split. So there are jobs that there are like repositories that gets imported in the main one, and there are projects that gets exported for be consumed in isolation. So for example, this is the kubectl that we saw before. When you compile the kubectl, you go in Kubernetes, but the code lives here. So part of the code lives here.
I was literally just waiting for the cuttlefish. The minute you came to this project, I was like, I can't wait for the cuttlefish. So for some context on this, at some point, someone on Twitter decided that kubectl was pronounced cube cuttlefish, as it well, cube cuttle. And
Yeah,
so
cool.
the cuttlefish became the mascot.
Yeah.
It was very cool.
Yeah, and as I said, I pronounce like
CTL,
terms in
yeah.
a different way all the time. So I don't have a favorite one. I have a
I mean,
random.
CTL, like, the calling it cube cuttle is purely people having fun with it. But yeah,
Yeah.
CTL is what a lot of people call it.
So yeah, obviously, like the kubectl, for example, use flags. So you can do dash dash and namespace or dash dash labels. All the stuff can be reused when you do extension for Kubernetes, because you can write your own code that interacts with Kubernetes, and it's better if you can make it with a similar flavor. So, for example, to stay in the kubectl land, you can write kubectl plugins, and kubectl plugins are just binaries that can get runs from the kubectl. Obviously, if you do a binary that does something similar like the kubectl can do, but it doesn't follow like the direction or the user experience, you end up with a not that usable binary.
Right.
So in order to, and this is a common issue, like everybody that writes code for Kubernetes will use dash dash namespace to filter by namespace, or they will use dash dash labels to filter by labels. So they took that code and they split it into, I don't remember the name, but yeah, the CLI runtime. So it's a small package that only contains code and helpers that you can use to write your kubectl commands.
Interesting.
So obviously, if you write extension in the language
Yeah.
that Kubernetes is written, so in Go, you have way more code. Otherwise, you have to figure it out by yourself. But
Right.
that's why it's complicated, because it's so extensible, and it tries to provide what you need to succeed extending Kubernetes. Otherwise, it would be like a jungle.
Sorry, the folks in the Hacktober's Discord are savagely taking the mick out of me. Perfect. Cool. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
So, and that comes to the SIG place, I presume.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
how do you? Let me move you in the other. Okay, so I can see.
I only
The
just this is totally random, but I just saw I've never heard that before. In the top languages in this repo, there's Starlark. I've never heard of Starlark before.
um,
I'm gonna have to
yeah,
look that up. Anyway,
I
sorry.
don't even know. Yeah,
Yeah.
who knows what it is? Oh yeah, I think it's the
Yeah.
meta language that you use to describe. Because also, oh, this is cool. This is a good one.
Okay.
So obviously, when you run such a big organization, also the management of the organization itself is complicated. You
Right.
have many repositories, and all
Yeah.
those repositories has like contributors. Some of them has view access, some of them has write access. So how do you manage all of this? And Kubernetes manage that with the infrastructure as a code. So if you want to be part
No
of the
way.
Kubernetes
Right.
community,
Yeah.
you can ask for being part of it.
Right.
Obviously,
Via like a pull request.
yeah, that's it.
That's
So
amazing.
let me see. I don't remember if
Yeah, you
this is
see that top one's a great example. Someone's removing themselves as an admin of a SIG
yeah,
with a pull request. That's crazy.
yeah. And if we look for the closed one, yeah, you can create new teams because maybe there is a new repo,
Right.
or there are maybe some owner of the SIG or the chair of the SIG is onboarding new contributors, so they are adding them in the organization, and they're having them as a part of a SIG. So it's open because there is no. I mean, there is a temporary owner of obviously the GitHub account because
Right.
it has to happen, but
Right.
the collaboration is on like 100% on all the layer. So
It's very cool. Yeah. That's a really neat way of doing it.
and yeah, I mean, and when you have so many people and the project becomes so big, you need to find a way to organize like all these like contribution. And the SIGs, the special interest groups, are the way Kubernetes, make place together people that has the same interest. So that's why SIG has interest in, because maybe you really, this is good for like the Kubernetes itself as a project, but it's also good for you as a contributor. So if I don't care about like monitoring, I probably won't look at the SIG instrumentation, because that's what probably they do. But maybe I like the scalability side, so I would go to the SIG scalability for whatever meeting, and they have a mailing list. So maybe I will start from there, and from there, from a topic that I kind of know or I'm interested with, I go deeper and maybe go, um, and I start to contribute. So when the project is so big, you can't really take it all together. So you have to find your way to get in, and the SIGs are a very good way to do it. For example, there is the SIG testing. So if you know a lot about testing, or you want to know about a lot more about testing, the SIG testings is not responsible for the quality of the tests in the repo. They are responsible for the infrastructure that the community needs for running their tests.
Got you. So they don't they are not the people who have like the final say on which tests get added to which repo. They just provide the tools for people to add those tests on.
Yeah, because every SIG that owns part of the code base is responsible for the quality of their code base.
Right.
So the SIG AWS needs to take care of the AWS codes, and they have to figure it out.
Just a brief note for viewers. If you see me looking around panicking, that's because my streaming PC is having another one of its episodes and it's having a meltdown. If my video and sound gets laggy, that's what's going on. I'm very sorry. Hopefully it calms itself down. Anyway, sorry.
Maybe you need a Kubernetes cluster.
Definitely do. Or I just need to throw this laptop in the canal will be the easiest solution. Sorry. So so SIGs help people find interest and help people also moderate the amount that they have to pay attention to the project, because it can be very overwhelming. So how do you go about this might be a strange question. So from navigating the code, if you end up being like, oh hey, I'm interested in this particular part of the code, how do you then attach that to how do you find out which SIG looks after that part of the project? How do they have discovery features around that?
Yeah, if you open a project like the cluster API, I just open a random one. And you look for the owners, you see who can approve pull requests, and you can review them. And those are teams, and usually there is a SIG attached to it. So I know that the cluster API project belongs to the SIG cluster lifecycle.
Cool, nice. That makes sense. That's awesome. And a really good use of GitHub Teams as well, actually.
Yeah, they have almost all the projects are maintained the same way. So there are two groups, one that can review, as you can see, there is a cluster API admins and maintainers. So the admins can do, they have all the rights on the repository, and maintainers can only review. So there are all of them are almost structured in the same way. Awesome. So we can take another one that probably won't have that, because that's what happens. We're humans.
Yeah, with 71 repos, something's not going to be consistent.
Yeah, I can see owner here, so I took the good one, but maybe there is. But you can clearly see that it's AWS related. So
so you get an idea of where it's
crazy, let's say. But there is
there's actually a label. In the labels, KAS SIG AWS. So it actually says the SIG in the labels for the repo.
Yeah, I mean, there is when you ask for. This is also a different organization, so this is not the Kubernetes organization. This is
the Kubernetes SIGs one.
It contains projects from the SIGs group, because let's think about the SIG testing. SIG testing needs code or needs tools. For example, if you used there is a CLI that is called kind, and it is the short form of Kubernetes in Docker. So it helps you to run a Kubernetes cluster in a Docker container. And that project is coming from the SIG testing that has a need. They had to do end-to-end testing for Kubernetes. So they set up a project that helps them to quickly create Kubernetes cluster in a reliable, in a way that doesn't require a lot of power and Docker container was a good solution.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome. Cool.
And obviously, when you have to find the right one. Usually, I jump between them based on needs. So it can be my needs or can be their needs. Usually, it's mine. So if I'm working on instrumentation, I usually like follow the sig instrumentation. Or at some point, I had to write end-to-end tests for my project that were using Kubernetes. So the best way for me to learn was from the people that were actually running the testing in Kubernetes. So I joined the SIG testing and I
That's
started
awesome.
look at the mail, and at the mail that they exchanged in the mailing list, and I joined the Slack channel and I started to see what they were doing. And from there you learn. And
Yeah.
at some point, if you are interesting and you know enough, you can help. And that's good.
Right. Yeah.
Sounds
Which I guess brings us round to you are a member of a particular SIG, which is the releases SIG.
Yeah.
So that was your journey to joining that SIG. I guess you were hanging around, looking interested in how the releases worked, and eventually you had something to say, and so ended up contributing. Is that how that went?
Yeah, that's how it works, and that's
Cool.
one of the reasons about why I'm happy to speak about the sig-release in particular.
Yeah.
It is because it's one of those projects that doesn't require like coding experience.
Right.
The sig-release responsibility is obviously to cut releases. So
Right.
at the end, even if it's a collaboration effort, somebody has to press the button. So the sig-release is the one that does that. Um,
Yeah, so
and
what is the release process for Kubernetes? So for folks who work on smaller projects, the idea of cutting releases is like actually quite bizarre in 2020 when we all have CI on our stuff. So what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. It's obviously it's open source as well.
Right.
So if you
Yeah,
go in
yeah, yeah.
Kubernetes and you do release,
Right.
you find the repository where the code that sig release members
Cool.
use. And look at that, there is a CMD command, a
Nice.
CMD package, and the CMD package you have a bunch of them, and some of them are really like weird name. Like krell is the one that is used to cut release, and in
Okay.
the infrastructure is on Google Cloud. So we use Google Cloud Build. That is the service that does build to trigger the release. So it's all in CI/CD, but you have to decide when you want to do it. And when it's time to cut a release, for example, I made my first release recently, so I'm new to this kind of new, let's say. But you open a Purecast and you follow your journey in the Purecast, and there are other people from the SIG that helps you to figure out what to do. So let me see if I can find.
Sorry, I'm answering a question someone asked in chat. Rohit, if you could throw in chat for me, are those repositories that you're talking about that are pending, are they in a repository that is tagged with the Hacktoberfest topic, or do those pull requests have Hacktoberfest accepted on them? If either of those are true, then you have to wait 14 days from when you open the pull request, and in those 14 days, as long as they don't get marked as spam during that time, that's when they get marked as approved, I believe. But the best place to go to ask about that, Rohit, if you go to discord.gg/Hacktoberfest, we'll be able to get you a better answer in there. We'll be able to ask you more questions about the repositories, and the DigitalOcean folks will be able to take a look for you. So discord.gg/Hacktoberfest would be the best place to go for that question.
Yeah, I also have to say that I didn't recently follow, but I remember that at the beginning of Oktoberfest, like Kubernetes was one of the project that got bombed by like spam. So I'm not, and that's probably one of the reasons about why this year we have like the requirement for the tags and the label and so on, because it was a way. I mean, we got like really hundreds of pull requests that were like very bad. So I'm not even sure if it's a project that accept like or plays for Oktoberfest anymore. I don't really know. I hope so, but yeah, I can leave that. Yeah, I mean, what did I say? Yeah, when we have to cut a release, we open an issue and we go from there. Let me see if I can find a good one. Yeah, cut 120 beta 0 release. So that's what we do. It's a collaboration effort. Right. You see links in there. Some of the links you can see them for obvious reason, right? They can contain like sensitive information from the release pipeline, but we keep open as most as we can, but sometimes it doesn't. it's not possible, or it's too
That's
risky.
super interesting. So what is the so you're drawing on like such a huge amount of projects, such a huge amount of groups. Like, is there what is the process of cutting? Like, how do you bring all that together into actually deciding like, hey, in this is the next version number bump we're doing. This is like when that happens and when you need to get stuff to us. Like, does that all make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously you can't really wait for all the groups to say we are ready.
Right.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
you will never cut it. So it's not like a consensus base, but
Yeah.
it's on schedule. So
Cool.
every month we have uh, four minor release or whatever. So I don't
Cool.
remember, but if you look at the SIG,
Right.
let me
So
try to remember.
that was like my next question, which was going to be like, you do it on a schedule. How do you decide what is like a patch, a minor, a major bump? Are those on schedules or are those just
Everything
based
is
on what's happening?
scheduled.
Cool,
Everything is
awesome.
scheduled. So even minor,
Yeah,
even
yeah,
like everything is on schedule.
amazing.
Uh,
Huh?
So let me see. I don't remember. I mean, it's yeah. As you can see, there is in the Kubernetes sig
Right, you
release,
have every release.
you have every release,
Yeah.
and for every release, there is a team that takes care of the release.
Okay.
So there is the release team here that
Yeah.
for one, whoops, for a four. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's also it's not easy, but at some point
No.
you get used to it.
Right.
Let me see if I can. I mean, for example, the next one will be 120. So if we there is a schedule on the. I mean, you asked about the release cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and it's listed here. So Monday,
Cool.
September 15th is the first week of the release cycle.
Yeah.
And the 6th of October is when the announcement freeze. So the announcements are all the new features and improvement that we want,
Mm-hmm.
and the SIGs can ask for their announcement to be part of the release. Um, when the announcement freeze happens, you
Mm-hmm.
can't do it anymore, obviously, because it's
Right.
freezed, and all
Yeah.
those steps are documented. So
Interesting.
I have a chat here, so maybe I can comment somehow. I can share this link somehow because I think
Yeah, if
it's.
you throw the link into our private chat,
Oh,
and I'll
okay.
post it for you. If you throw it straight to the comments, you'll get banned.
So that I was looking for that. Okay,
Perfect.
so this is the explanation of the release phases. So there is the announcement freeze and the burn down. There is the code freeze when nothing can change, and we use that time to. I mean, not nothing, but only a subset of pull requests like bug fixes can go in. And there is a test freeze that is the time where we try to figure out if the release is stable
Mm-hmm.
and so on.
Cool.
So
Interesting. Huh.
and I mean, it's one of the reasons about. I mean, it's very hard to learn all of this stuff from the
Mm.
outside if you don't have interest or if you're not feel part of the group because
Yeah.
it's a lot of like document and a
Right.
lot of the,
It's a lot of process that's not directly related to like you as a user using that code.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but it's
definitely, and also why it's a good
yeah.
place if you are not a developer.
Right.
It's because I think every iteration you can every cycle well, like every measure release so
Mm-hmm.
119 20 21 has a
Mm-hmm.
different group
Mm-hmm.
and the sig release is split in different subgroups like there is the CI signal
Mm-hmm.
that looks at the CI and tries to figure out if the release is stable. So we have obviously a lot of pipelines
Mm-hmm.
and integration tests, end-to-end tests on different like cloud providers, and there are scalability tests. So all of those make noise,
Mm-hmm.
and the CI signal is the subgroup in the SIG release that takes care of understanding those signals,
Mm-hmm.
and they can block a release if the signals are too noisy.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
and so in order to do that, you don't really need to be a developer because you have to follow the red flags and try to when you see a code a test that it's flaky because it's failing with a not that specific pattern or for
Yeah.
no reasons time to time, you have to take that you have to understand who owns that piece of code and you
Mm-hmm.
have to reach out to the sig and says, oh, I saw that this is flaky and you have to take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like so it's not your
Yeah.
responsibility in that role to fix the actual code. Your responsibility is
Right.
to
You need to
figure
be
out
aware of
who.
what is. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
same for the announcement that it's
Right.
a subgroup
Right.
that tries to figure out what can go in the release
Mm-hmm.
and tries to keep the owner of the announcement on track. So there is an announcement freeze. So there is a period where you can't get new announcement in the release. So the announcement helps you to make that happen. So if you want to get in 120, they help you to get in 120. It's mainly like shaking people and says, "Come on, do you want to get in or not?"
That sounds like product management, to be fair.
Yeah, but doesn't require code. And I did
yeah.
that, and all those groups change, as I said, for every release. And there is a shadowing program, so you can be a shadow in that group. So I shadowed for twice for bug triage. So we look at all the bugs or all the pull requests and issues that has bugs, the bugs label, and and the one that are in the milestone we are looking at, and we try to get them merged. So it means that if it stayed, you go and you try to make the developer like
Amazing.
what they need, or you shake them and so on. So it's project management, but it's important to get stuff in sometimes because it's so big that you have to do it.
So I guess that this is just a thought before we move on. I guess like we were talking at the beginning about getting into the community and being able to benefit from that community, and like starting with releases, from what you're saying, you interface with all these other teams, that's part of the job, is like a really good way, I guess, to get a lay of the land. Like if you look at that list of SIG, you're like, whoa, that's a lot, that's very intimidating. Starting here would be like a great way to get to know them all a little bit, because they're all coming and talking to you about the releases, which is super cool.
Yeah, and there is also like part of your role is to dig and find those SIGs.
Right.
So
yeah,
I knew about some of them that I never heard about.
Yeah.
So and yeah, I mean, for example, when I shadow, one of the round was with a person that was doing support in their company. So it wasn't writing code. It was it was just supporting Kubernetes like 20 and so that was, I mean, and for him was a good opportunity to learn what was coming next, and
right. And what the
it was like a way to see his future pain, let's say. And it was in the bug triage that has sense because usually you get when if you support Kubernetes in your cloud provider, you get requests also for the Kubernetes bugs. So if you can develop a loop that helps you to stay up to date, why not?
So this is kind of an off-topic question, but I'm now absolutely fascinated by this. So like this shadowing setup and like the fact there are SIGs, for bug triaging, I imagine there must be a lot of people who work in these SIGs are doing it because their full-time job is something where they use Kubernetes and care about those things, right? So there's lots of people who are paid to do this, but as an open source project, I imagine you also have a lot of I don't want to say traditional open source maintainers, but you have a lot of people involved who, well, it's not part of their jobs, it is purely just an interest. How at such like an a developed organization, like how does it deal with that differing level of commitment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's built in the organization, in the Kubernetes organization itself. So usually the people that demonstrate to have more time or that can contribute with more consistency, they can become like a SIG chair or a lead and so on. So because obviously you need, like, for the survival of the project, you need those people because the project is, I mean, I'm also a maintainer for like smallest project. Like I develop a library called test containers. It's the Go version. There are versions for like every languages.
Cool.
But I'm almost alone there, even if it's used by a good amount of people. If I stop developing it, nothing will move, so nothing will break. But here, with the Kubernetes community, when you have so much people and so many moving parts, something is going to break even if you don't do anything. So you need to build a structure that helps you to take care of it. So
but if I'm someone who just has like a day a month or a couple of hours who are there to contribute, like I will be put in a position where that's fine, and I'm not gonna like be worried about letting anyone down.
It's totally fine. And as every SIGs has a weekly or bi-weekly meeting that is everybody can join and can say, oh, I have this issue, or I saw this issue, I want to fix that. How can I do it? And people can help you to find the root of that, because as you say, like there are like hundreds of repositories. Where is the code I have to touch see my bug or whatever
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
validate that. You join a SIG and you ask, and usually you get help. And if you don't get help as quick as you want, there is a weekly, or bi-weekly meeting. So you get in face to face on Zoom, and somebody has to answer at some point. So.
Awesome. Very cool. Nice. Yeah, thank you for going on that tangent. So we dealt with this like being like a really good way to, contribute if I don't necessarily want to start with like code contributions. But that's interesting. I guess like say I am someone who is like not at a point where I'm confident enough to read Go code or to contribute Go code, and I rock up and I'm like, cool, I want to try and do something like sig releases. Like that process looks a little bit different to, I guess, like the entry process to looking at a repo that you showed us earlier. Does like sig release and these other non-code areas have like a different onboarding process for people?
From at least from my experience,
Yeah.
the sig-release is probably the one I know that has
Yeah.
this no code
Cool.
like
Great.
opportunity. I don't know if there are others. Maybe there are.
I imagine the documentation sig would probably have some.
Yeah, there is a
easy
sig
things.
documentation. There is also, so I think there is a place where there are all the sigs, and I think it's in
There
org.
is. I was looking at it earlier, and it's kind of scary.
There is an
There's
org,
I
and
think it's called the master list or something.
yeah, I don't remember.
Sig list. Kubernetes sig list. Here it is. It's in community, so it's
Yeah.
cool.
So oops, what did I do? So for example, because it really depends. I mean, the sig release has these like different subgroups, because ideally you can automate go and ping people and squash them, but it's not that easy. And it's good for now it's good to have like contributors and humans being there. Even the release process can be even more automatic than what it is today.
Right.
It was pretty automatic. I made my first release, and it took me like, I had to run 4 commands and wait for like an hour, so that was not too bad. But yeah, obviously the idea here is to reduce the amount of like human interaction, but for now it's a good opportunity to get a vibe. And
Cool.
the sig release is responsible for the sig documentation. I think if it exists, yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah, there is a sig docs.
Yeah.
And they have meetings, as I say, and there are like leaders, and they try to to shape the documentation itself. So when you go on Kuberenetes.org and you see the documentation, that's the team that is responsible for that. But when it comes to, there is a cross line between a point of contact between a release and documentation. So that one of the subgroup of the sig release is the documentation subgroup, because they try to figure out if the new features or the new bug fixes are in the changelog, and if they are like documented and so on. So that's another. So that's another probably good way that you can.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I was just looking at, I guess, another one. I'm sorry, this is now me just throwing out random SIGs. That might be a good place to start. Contributor experience looks like a really interesting
definitely. Is the one responsible to help new contributors or to figure out a better way to contribute to the project.
Super cool. Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
We have this is a question going back to our earlier conversation about, like where Kubernetes ends and Docker begins. Shreyas has this question, which is, I've never used any container orchestration framework before. Does Kubernetes integrate with Docker Compose?
Yes, there is a
big pause. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that probably I'm not that up to date with this question, but I know that the Docker team made Docker Compose usable for Kubernetes. So I think I can always Google, like with you, Docker Compose Kubernetes, and we can figure it out.
It looks like, okay, that's relatively recent, May 2020. So it looks like on the Kubernetes blog, they're saying you can translate a compose file to
Yeah, I
Kubernetes
think there is
equivalent.
this translation. I'm fine with it, but there is also a way you can just run Docker Compose. And but it's a project that comes from
Cool.
maybe the
I
Docker.
love that title. Kubernetes plus compose.
Yeah, that's it.
Compose. Yeah, nice.
This is
Awesome.
a conversion tool, but that is
Yeah,
not what we want. I think there
right.
is a way that you can
Just
apply.
just use it. Interesting. Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I don't really have an
Yeah.
answer
That's
ready
good.
for.
That gives Shreyas the starting point. Cool. Awesome. Is there anything else on Kubernetes or on the SIG release that you wanted to talk about before we answer a couple more of the questions that
I
come in?
think if you're interested, you can join the mailing list. And
Cool.
when there is, I think the best way to be on board in the
Yeah.
project is to shadow
Right.
one of the
That
groups.
shadowing program is super cool.
So if you obviously is a there is no, there are a limited number of people that
Right.
can join, but every release cycle has its own
Yeah.
shadows, and we try to
Uh,
change them all the time,
yeah.
because obviously some shadows becomes leads and some leads
Yeah.
becomes like release engineer or whatever. So there is a bit of ladder there as well.
Cool.
Um,
I just in the chat I just linked to the shadows document
yeah,
for SIG release.
that's what, yeah, have a look at it. And the 120 release cycle started, so the shadows are set, but the
Cool. For the
121
next one.
we
Yeah.
can't.
Which will be I guess starting early next year because this one I saw on the
Yeah,
timeline this one went through to December. Cool. Nice. Awesome. So you could be part of the first release of NEC of 2021.
that's
Very
it.
cool. Nice. Awesome. Cool. So I think we got through all of the questions that were relevant to this. Is there if folks want to get in touch with you, ask you anything about what you've shared today, what's the best way for them to do that? If there is a best way for them to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter with yeah, and that's a good way.
Gianluca
My
RB,
DMs are
right?
open.
This
So
one?
just, yes, that's right.
Perfect.
And
Nice.
yeah, that's the best way. I'm also on other like social or LinkedIn, whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's the fastest way to get to
Cool.
my
Awesome.
attention.
Wonderful. Cool. Well, thank you so much for walking us through your development journey and also giving us so many details about the Kubernetes projects and how it works and how you would start. Also, like, yeah, that like going into how you approach a new open source project. Super cool. I'm looking forward to clipping that out and doing like a, hey, here's how you do it. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah.
Are you joining, or I've seen a lot of tweets from Equinix Metal people that they're all at the spooky conference today. Have we been keeping you away from a cool conference?
Yeah, no, I took part of the software. I'm keeping myself out from conferences
Cool.
by myself, so
Nice.
I'm in a
Okay.
quiet break.
Okay, good. I'm glad that wasn't us. Yeah, again, thank you so much. I'll backstage you now and let you
Yeah,
go. And thank you for being here. So again, if you want to get in touch, it's twitter.com, GiannaRB.
thank
Cool.
you. So have a good day and make your contribution. It's just one phone away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Catch you
Bye
soon.
bye.
Awesome. So thank you again, Gianluca. That was super cool. As I said, I already did the summary, but you can. We saw a myriad of ways to get started with open source in non-code ways, particularly in big projects like Kubernetes that have these amazing processes around the SIGs, ways you can get involved with the SIGs and the shadowing. As we were walking around Gianluca as well, I was poking into a couple of SIGs and things I'm interested in. That's how I found the the contributor experience one. That list is huge, and you will definitely find something that's related to some part of software engineering that you are interested in exploring more. And they all have processes and ways of getting involved through mailing lists and these shadow opportunities, as Gianluca showed us. So before I do the outro, there's actually a couple of questions I want to answer from the chat. So first up, don't go anywhere. This is our first show of the day. We have three more shows today. Two more shows today, not three more shows today. We have two more shows today. I'll give you a run through of the schedule to come in just a moment. And we also have three shows tomorrow, and it's the last day of the show for us tomorrow because Hacktoberfest ends on Saturday. So tomorrow's our last shows, and we've got big things planned. So don't go anywhere. I'll run you through the schedule. But first, to Sudhanshu's question, Sudhanshu asked, are there any ambassador programs like Microsoft Learning Ambassadors for that aimed at high school students? Unfortunately, there's not that many, Sudhanshu. It's a lot of these programs mainly for legal reasons, honestly, require participants to be over the age of 18. So a lot of the ambassador programs out there are, for example, like Microsoft Student Partners, GitHub Campus Experts, MLH Coaches, the Auth0 ambassadors, the Git Kraken ambassadors. The list goes on and on and on. A lot of these programs are 18 and above. So stick with it. Find other ways to get involved. But for a lot of those programs, you unfortunately might have to wait until you're 18. And then Shreyas asked the question ages and ages and ages ago about. No, I can't find it. Okay. No, that's not the one. Why can't I find it? Was it Shreyas or was it Sudanshu? It's now disappeared. The question. Oh, it was Sudanshu. Sorry. What should we prepare if we want to go into product-based companies and you're not yet in college? I'm guessing you're asking that because you're in high school, Sudanshu. I would say I don't know if there's much different product-based companies versus like any other developer path. I guess I would say a useful set of things to develop if you're going into like a product-based company is to understand a little bit more about the particulars of like the product release lifecycle or the product lifecycle. Like if I'm and what I would focus on is like the particulars of like who is that product for and what market is that product for. So what I mean by that is like, hey, if I'm deploying like a SaaS tool, like a software as a service tool on the internet that's aimed at businesses to use it, the differences between like the tools and techniques and the way I release that software may vary a little bit to like consumers. Like if I'm releasing a twitter.com, right, like that's a little bit different. So I'd understand a little bit about how products differ for different like markets, different people who buy them. And other than that, I think the software skills are very, very similar. There's not a whole lot of difference, I would say, in terms of like the developer skills you have to learn based on like whether you want to go to a company that releases a product or a company that is building something else with software. Cool. So that's all from me for this show. So let me give you the schedule preview for the rest of the day. So if you go to twitch.tv RaiseDev's schedule, you will see our schedule for today and for tomorrow. Ignore the schedule for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Those days are gone. We're done with them. You can find the recordings on the Twitch. But for the rest of this week, the next show up is with Nathaniel. Nathaniel is a evangelist at Twilio. He's based in London. He's awesome. We're going to be doing old code review. He's bringing us the first JavaScript app he wrote in university. And we're going to be talking about what he's learned since he wrote that app and what he'd do differently today. Then our last show of the day is with Sam Lanning. They are at the UN, which is fascinating, and I can't wait to hear more. They used to work at GitHub via an acquisition, so that's also a really cool story. But Sam Lanning is bringing us an awesome project called Synesthesia, which is, if you liked our show with Ramon yesterday, who I also saw in chat, hi Ramon. If you liked our show with Ramon yesterday and you're like, cool, wacky hardware contraptions that involve sound and lights, Synesthesia is going to be a great project for you to check out. It's a hardware project it's a project for managing light and sound in festival installations. So LED strips, coordinating the flashing of those LED strips with sound and composing that together to make like basically interactive shows. Sam built this for doing interactive art installations at festivals that they go to. And so we're going to be checking out that project and doing kind of like talking about like where that project is and what they would do differently than they did it today. Tomorrow, the last day of Hacktoberfest, big day, with Nicholas Carrigan in the morning. Nicholas is a developer who's been hanging out in the Hacktoberfest Discord, been helping lots of people, and has been hanging out in our chat a lot. We are lucky enough to get Nicholas on the show to talk about what they've been up to, some of the open source that they've been doing this month, and some of their projects. I'm very excited. We did a show with a guest who was showing off a project, Porter. It's a PHP project for... Oh my god, that's terrible. I've already forgotten. It's a DevOps World project. And Nicholas actually like finished a contribution to that project in the span of the show, which was really cool. So that's going on. And then a shout out in between. In between our first show on Friday and our second show on Friday, Vonage, who are another Hacktoberfest partner, are doing their last show of Hacktoberfest. We will be over there talking about some of the contributions that we've enjoyed seeing this Hacktoberfest. So you can also catch us on the Vonage show, and you should check out the Vonage show anyway, because they've been doing a lot of hard work for Hacktoberfest as well. So that, I think, is at 2 p.m. UTC, an hour before our second show of Friday, 3 p.m. UTC, with Eddie, who is an open source advocate. Eddie does a lot of work to help people get into open source. We had him on at the beginning of the month. Now we're going to have a kind of reflection with him at the end of the month. How's that Hacktoberfest gone? What has he been up to? And then our final show, the big one, our last show of Hacktoberfest, 9 p.m. UTC, is with Matt Cowley, who anyone from the Hacktoberfest Discord knows, maintainer of the Hacktoberfest app, community manager of DigitalOcean, been working really hard on Hacktoberfest. and Chris Ewald, who works here at Raise.dev. Chris built the Hacktoberfest app a year ago. Matt has obviously been working on it a lot then and now. So we're going to have an old maintainer, new maintainer chat about the Hacktoberfest app, about the software that makes it all happen. What would they do differently? What have they changed since it was originally built? That kind of thing, which is going to be such a great way to end Hacktoberfest this year, I think. So that's a schedule. Sudanshu asked, will we be doing a show after Hacktoberfest? Yes, we will be back after Hacktoberfest. We will not be back 3 times a day because I would die. We'll be back probably 2 times a week. We don't know exactly which days yet, but we know we'll be back with probably 2 different shows. We're going to be back once a week with some live coding where we just sit down and work on a cool project, and then we'll be back another time in the week with a show that's been very similar to this one. So we'll have a lot of different guests on, and we'll be doing different things with them, different activities, what we call segments. So we'll be back. We will be back after Hacktoberfest with different kinds of shows, and we'll let you know as soon as we have those plans solidified. We'll put up a blog post or something and announce it on our Twitter, and obviously here on Twitch as well. So don't worry, we're not going anywhere. We've had too much fun. We will be back after Hacktoberfest, just at a reduced density. Cool. So that's all of my rambling about the schedule. Follow us on Twitch. Drop us a follow. Hit the love heart. Hit the bell. That'll give you notifications whenever we go live. You can also follow us on Twitter at RaiseDevs, which you'll also get regular notifications from us, and you get to hear all the other wonderful things that we're up to at Raise.dev. And if you want to be part of those lovely things, you can go to Raise.dev, our website, and you can get matched for free whilst we're in early access with one of our coaches who will help you get all the experience you need to get the developer job that you want. Whether you're trying to get your first job after learning, maybe in a boot camp, maybe self-taught, maybe after a career change, or if you're already a developer and you're trying to get more skills, you're trying to get a promotion, trying to get a raise, trying to change job, any of those things, we will find a coach who can help you with that journey and who will work with you on that journey and do some pair programming. Sorry, there's a fly in front of me that I didn't catch. That's going to bother me all day. We will find you a coach that will help you with that, and you can sign up completely for free at Raise.dev. So that's all from me. I will see you in 2 hours for our next show with Nathaniel. Do not miss it. It's going to be a really fun show. Nathaniel's a great streamer and a great speaker, and so that's going to be awesome to look at Nathaniel's old JavaScript and talk about what he would do differently. So see you in 2 hours, and if we don't see you then, I hope we see you before the end of our streaming in this month. Have a wonderful day.